The sun had barely climbed over the rooftops when the small southern town's main street began to hum with life. It was Saturday, the one day each week when neighbors gathered for the farmer's market. The air smelled of ripe fruit, fresh baked, bread and cut flowers. Wooden stalls and colorful tents lined the sidewalks, each one telling its own little story, jars of golden honey catching the light, baskets of corn stacked high, and tables filled with homemade pies cooling in the breeze. Near. The corner where the street turned toward the courthouse square, Angela Carter was setting up her stand. She had been part of the market for years, but today her table looked especially beautiful. Neatly arranged baskets of peaches, tomatoes, and bell peppers filled the front, their colors so bright they seemed to glow under the morning sun. A hand-painted sign read, "Carter Family Farms, fresh from our soil." Angela stood behind it, smoothing the edges of a tablecloth and checking each basket. She wore a light yellow blouse and a wide-brimmed straw hat, her smile warm as she greeted early customers. Angela's farm had been in her family for 3 generations. She loved telling people how her grandparents had started with just 2 acres and a few rows of vegetables, and how the land had grown along with the family. Every peach she sold came from a tree she could point to. Every tomato had been picked by someone she knew by name. It wasn't just business for her. It was her way of keeping a promise to her parents, who had taught her that feeding people was a kind of service. The market was already lively when a tall man in a crisp blue uniform stepped out from between the rows of stalls. Officer Rick Dalton was known by sight to most people in town. His uniform looked freshly pressed, his posture straight, and his eyes sharp as he scanned the area. He walked with purpose, the kind of stride that made people instinctively step aside. Rick's job was to keep order at the market, but he had a reputation for being strict, sometimes a little too strict. Angela noticed him approaching and gave him a polite nod. She kept arranging the vegetables, thinking perhaps he was just passing by. But Rick stopped right in front of her table, his gaze sweeping over the baskets before landing on the way her stand was set up. Without a word of greeting, he said, "You can't be here like this. You're blocking part of the parking space." Angela looked at the space behind her. A single corner of her stand did stretch a little beyond the chalk line on the pavement, but it wasn't in anyone's way. No cars had been parked there all morning, and there was still plenty of room for people to pass. "I see," she said softly. "I can adjust it a bit if that helps." She reached for the nearest basket to move it. But before she could, Rick stepped closer, his shadow falling across the table. "No, this isn't allowed," he said firmly. Without waiting for her to respond, he gripped one of the baskets of peaches and tipped it onto the ground. Golden fruit rolled in all directions, some bumping into the curb, others splitting slightly as they hit the pavement. A small gasp came from a woman standing nearby, but Rick didn't seem to notice. Angela froze for a moment, watching as her work from the early morning, picking, sorting, arranging, scattered across the street. "Sir," she began, keeping her voice even. "Please, I can fix it. There's no need to—" Rick reached for another basket, this one filled with tomatoes. Before Angela could step around the table, he tilted it too, sending the bright red fruit tumbling down. Some landed softly in the grass strip by the sidewalk, but others burst open on the pavement, leaving small patches of juice. Shoppers had begun to turn their heads. A young couple stopped mid-step to see what was happening, while an older man with a bag of bread shook his head slowly. A few people murmured to each other, wondering aloud why the officer didn't simply ask her to shift the stand. Angela stepped forward and rested her hands on the edge of the table. "Officer," she said, "I respect the rules, but this is my livelihood. Please allow me to correct the position before—" Rick cut her off with a short wave of his hand. "Rules are rules," he said flatly. His eyes darted to the small group gathering a few steps away, as if daring anyone to challenge him. Angela took a slow breath. Inside, she felt a knot forming in her chest, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She had been through moments like this before, times when quick temper only made things worse. She reached for one of the baskets he hadn't touched yet, determined to move it herself, but Rick's voice rose slightly. "Ma'am, step back. I'll handle it." "Handle it?" A voice from the crowd echoed softly, but Rick didn't look up. By now, several onlookers had their phones out, holding them up quietly to record the scene. Angela saw the small red recording lights, but her focus stayed on the table in front of her. She didn't want to cause a scene, but it was already becoming one. She looked Rick in the eye, her tone still measured. "Officer, I'm not trying to argue. I just want to work. People are waiting to buy their produce." She nodded toward a woman holding cash in her hand. Rick didn't glance at the customer. Instead, he shifted another crate, pushing it roughly toward the curb. A few cucumbers rolled away, one stopping near the feet of a little boy, who bent to pick it up and place it gently back on the table. "Thank you, sweetheart," Angela told the boy with a smile, her voice softening for a moment. The boy's mother pulled him closer, watching Rick with a cautious eye. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Someone whispered, "Isn't that Ms. Carter?" And another answered, "Yes, I think so." Angela stood a little straighter. She wasn't about to let this morning turn into a memory of humiliation. "Officer," she said one more time, "I'm happy to move my stand right now. All I ask is that you stop damaging my goods." Rick gave a short shake of his head. "Should have set it up right to begin with," he muttered, as if speaking only to himself. The sunlight was brighter now, and Angela could feel its warmth on her shoulders. She focused on her breathing, reminding herself that sometimes patience was more powerful than force. In her mind, she could hear her grandmother's voice, "Hold your ground, but keep your grace." A man from another stall stepped closer, a basket of strawberries in his hands. "Angela, need a hand?" he asked quietly. She smiled at him, grateful, but Rick turned sharply. "Stay back, sir. This is official business." The man hesitated, then stepped away, though his eyes didn't leave Angela. The space around them felt tense, like a moment before a summer storm. Angela picked up a few peaches from the ground, brushing the dust off them gently. The fruit was bruised, but she placed them back in the basket anyway, refusing to let them go to waste. The crowd watched in near silence now, except for the faint sound of more phones clicking into place to capture what was unfolding. Somewhere, in the back, a vendor whispered, "He's going to regret this." Angela didn't answer. She only kept her calm, her movements slow and deliberate, as if every second was part of a choice. Inside, she knew something Rick didn't. Something that would soon turn the tide of this morning in a way no one standing there could have guessed. The market street seemed to grow quieter, even though more people were arriving with their shopping bags and baskets. The usual cheerful chatter was replaced by hushed voices and cautious glances toward the corner where Angela's produce stand stood in disarray. The bright colors of the peaches and tomatoes that had rolled across the pavement now looked oddly out of place against the gray street. Some of them lay bruised, their fresh scent mixing with the warm air. Angela stood behind, her table straight-backed and calm, but inside she could feel the heaviness of the moment. She could hear small pockets of conversation in the crowd. People whispered to one another, trying to understand what was going on. "Why's he doing that?" someone asked softly. Another answered, "No idea, but she's not bothering anyone." Rick remained in front of her table, one hand resting on his belt, the other occasionally pointing to the baskets as if he still needed to prove some kind of point. He hadn't stepped back since the first basket had been tipped. His eyes kept moving from Angela to the small crowd that had formed, as though he was making sure no one interfered. A young man holding a cup of coffee spoke up from the edge of the group. "Officer, she's fine there. We all walk through this space every Saturday." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried just enough for others to nod in agreement. Rick didn't answer him. Instead, he pulled a small notepad from his pocket and began writing something. Angela watched, wondering if he was preparing to issue a fine. She thought of the early hours she had spent on the farm that morning, picking the ripest produce, making sure everything was clean and ready for customers. The idea of losing more than just the scattered fruit was frustrating, but she kept her tone even. "Officer," she said, "could you please explain what rule I'm breaking? I want to make sure I understand so it doesn't happen again." Her voice was steady, but there was a softness to it that made several people glance at her with respect. She wasn't raising her voice or making the moment bigger than it already was. She was simply asking for fairness. Rick flipped the notepad shut without writing much and put it back into his pocket. "You're set up beyond the designated vendor area," he said shortly. Angela gestured to the faint chalk lines drawn on the pavement. They marked the vendor spots, but hers was barely a few inches over. "I see," she replied, "but there's no one else here, and I can move it right. Now, if that helps." Instead of agreeing, Rick looked toward the crowd, then back at her, almost as if her calmness unsettled him. "It's not about now. It's about the rules being followed every time." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. A woman with a wide sun hat leaned toward her friend and said, "If it was anyone else, he'd just tell them to scoot the table over." Angela caught that remark, but didn't respond. She was aware that many in this town had seen her in community meetings, at school, events, and helping with charity drives, but she also knew not everyone knew the role she had recently been elected to. She wasn't there today as the new mayor. She was there as a farmer, a vendor, part of the market family. A middle-aged man who sold baked goods a few stalls down stepped forward, holding a loaf of bread in his hands. "Officer," he said in a calm, respectful tone, "maybe we can just give her a minute to shift things. No harm done." Rick's gaze fixed on him for a moment before he said, "Sir, please return to your stall." The baker sighed and stepped back, but his eyes stayed on Angela, offering silent support. A teenage girl with a shopping bag crouched down to pick up one of the peaches from the street. She brushed it off and tried to hand it to Angela. "Here, ma'am," she said softly. Angela smiled warmly. "Thank you, sweetheart." She took the peach and placed it gently back into a basket. The small gesture eased some of the tightness in her chest. Meanwhile, more phones had appeared in the crowd. People were recording, but they weren't loud about it. The red recording lights blinked quietly, documenting every word and action. Angela was aware of the cameras, but she wasn't playing to them. She focused on staying composed. "Officer," she said again, "you have my word. I'll fix this now. I believe in following the rules. Please, let's just move forward." But Rick didn't seem ready to let the moment go. He adjusted his stance, speaking just loud enough for the people around to hear. "If I let one vendor do this, others will think they can do the same." Angela simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She could feel eyes on her from all sides, and she knew the situation was building towards something larger. An elderly woman in a floral dress stepped closer. She was a regular customer of Angela's, someone who always bought her Sunday vegetables. "Here." "Angela, dear, do you need me to hold anything while you shift the table?" she asked gently. Angela appreciated the kindness, but glanced toward Rick, waiting for his reaction. "Ma'am," Rick said to the older woman, "I need you to step back as well." The woman looked surprised, but obeyed, though she gave Angela a quick pat on the hand before moving away. The air felt heavier now. The sun was climbing higher, making the shadows shorter and the colors sharper. Angela could see how tense the market had become. People who had come for a peaceful morning of shopping were now standing in a silent ring, watching something they didn't expect to see. Still, Angela didn't rush. She began carefully picking up more of the fallen fruit, dusting it off and placing it back in the baskets. Her movements were slow and deliberate, Every time she bent down, she reminded herself that her composure was her strength. Rick, still, standing firm, seemed less certain than he had at the start. His eyes flickered to the crowd again, perhaps noticing the way people were looking at him now, less with respect, more with concern. One of the men in the crowd muttered to his friend, "Does he even know who she is?" Angela heard it, but she let the words pass. It wasn't the moment to reveal anything herself. She was patient, and she knew patience often led to the right outcome. At that moment, a young mother carrying a toddler on her hip stepped forward slightly. "We've been coming here for years," she said to no one in particular. "She's never caused a problem. This doesn't make sense." Others nodded in agreement. The market, usually a place of laughter and conversation, now felt like a stage where everyone was waiting for the next scene. Angela placed the last peach back in the basket, straightened her tablecloth, and folded her hands in front of her. She looked at Rick without anger, only a calm steadiness in her eyes. "I'm ready to move it whenever you say, officer." But Rick didn't answer right away. The crowd's attention was fixed on the two of them. Somewhere in the distance, footsteps could be heard approaching from the main square, steady, purposeful steps that seemed to be heading right toward the scene. Angela didn't look away from Rick. Inside, she knew something important was about to happen. Something that would change the way this morning ended. She just had to wait a little longer. And so, in the quiet tension of that summer morning, with the produce stand standing partly empty and the crowd holding its breath, the story was still unfolding, one step closer to the moment that would surprise everyone watching. The sound of footsteps grew clearer with each passing second. They weren't hurried, but steady and firm, like someone walking with a clear purpose. The crowd that had gathered around Angela's stand turned their heads to see who was coming. From between the stalls emerged Councilman Howard, a well-respected figure in town known for his friendly demeanor and calm authority. He was dressed casually for the market, short-sleeved shirt, neatly pressed pants, and a straw hat resting on his head. But there was no mistaking the way people greeted him with nods and smiles as he walked by. When his eyes landed on Angela, a warm smile immediately crossed his face. "Good morning, Mayor Carter," he said, his voice loud enough for the crowd and Officer Rick to hear clearly. The word mayor seemed to hang in the air like the chime of a bell. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People who had been quietly recording lowered their phones slightly, looking between Angela and Rick to see what would happen next. Rick froze. His eyes darted from Howard to Angela, as if unsure he had heard correctly. "Mayor," he repeated, his voice a little quieter. Councilman Howard stepped closer, his expression calm but firm. "Yes, Mayor Carter," he said again, turning to the crowd with a small nod before looking back at Rick. "I'd like to know why one of our officers is overturning the mayor's produce stand instead of helping set it up." The crowd reacted instantly. Murmurs, gasps, even a few chuckles of disbelief. People began whispering to each other. "She's the new mayor?" someone said in awe. "I had no idea," another replied. Angela, still standing tall behind her table, met Rick's eyes with a quiet steadiness. She didn't smile or gloat. She simply said, "It's all right, Councilman. I'm more concerned about the example being set here today." Rick's face turned a shade paler as he shifted his stance. I wasn't aware," he muttered, his voice lower now. His hands, which had earlier moved with such certainty, now rested awkwardly at his sides. Howard kept his gaze steady, on him. "Whether you were aware or not," he said, "our officers are expected to treat every citizen with respect. That's especially true in a public place like this, where our community gathers to support one another." The people around them nodded in agreement. Some vendors began to step closer to Angela's stall, picking up fallen peaches and placing them back in baskets. Others started quietly rearranging the crates so the stand looked whole again. Angela joined them, thanking each person with a nod or a soft smile. "I appreciate all of you," she said, This market is a part of who we are as a town. Rick stood there, still trying to process what had just happened. The authority he had walked in with seemed to shrink under the weight of the truth. The cameras, still rolling, caught every flicker of his expression: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been regret. Howard didn't raise his voice, but his words carried. "Officer Dalton, perhaps you should take a moment to step back and allow the mayor to continue her mourning." Rick opened his mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. He took a slow step backward, his eyes briefly meeting Angela's. Before shifting toward the ground, the atmosphere began to change. What had been tense moments earlier now felt lighter, though a quiet sense of astonishment lingered in the air. Shoppers who had been hesitant to approach earlier now came forward, buying produce from Angela's stand with encouraging smiles. One older gentleman holding a bag of green beans said with a grin, "Mayor or not, you still sell the best tomatoes in town." His words drew a small laugh from the people nearby. Angela chuckled softly. "Thank you. I'm here for that very reason, to serve." Howard leaned closer to Angela, speaking just loud enough for her to hear. "I know you didn't plan on revealing your title like this, but maybe it's not such a bad thing. People are seeing you in action, calm, steady, and unshaken." Angela nodded thoughtfully. She had always believed that leadership wasn't about showing power, but about showing respect. And today, whether she liked it or not, the town had just seen a clear example of how she handled herself under pressure. The crowd's attention shifted again as a few more reporters from the local newspaper arrived, cameras in hand. They had apparently been tipped off by someone at the market. Angela politely greeted them, but made it clear she wasn't there for political speeches. "Today, I'm here as a vendor," she said. "Let's keep the focus on the market and our local businesses." Still, they couldn't resist taking a few photos of her standing beside her stall, with the baskets neatly arranged again. In one photo, Howard stood next to her, both of them smiling. In another, Angela was handing a bag of peaches to a customer, while children stood nearby munching on fresh strawberries. Rick lingered near the edge of the market for a few more minutes, but his presence now felt small compared to the buzz around Angela's stand. Eventually, he turned and walked away toward the street, disappearing from sight. As the morning went on, more people stopped by, not just to shop, but to offer words of encouragement. "We saw what happened," one woman said softly. "You handled it with such grace." Another added, "It means a lot to see our mayor standing right here with us." Angela thanked each person sincerely. She didn't want the focus to be on her title alone, but on the way people could come together, even in moments of conflict. Howard eventually excused himself to visit other stalls, but not before patting Angela lightly on the shoulder. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. "You've already set a tone for your time as mayor, whether you planned to or not." As the sun climbed higher and the market settled back into its usual rhythm, Angela took a moment to reflect. She hadn't planned to start her day like this. She had expected a quiet morning of selling produce, chatting with neighbors, and enjoying the warmth of the community. Instead, she had faced a challenge that could have easily turned sour. But now, looking around at the people smiling, helping, and talking to one another, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The incident wasn't just about her. It was about the town seeing what leadership looked like when it was grounded in respect, patience, and understanding. And though she knew there would be more challenges ahead, she also knew she had earned something important today: the trust of her community. The last of the peaches were sold just before noon. Angela packed up her stand, thanked the vendors nearby, and prepared to head home. As she walked to her truck, a few shoppers waved and called out, "See you next Saturday, Mayor." She smiled and waved back, her heart lighter than it had been that morning. The memory of the officer's surprise lingered in her mind, but so did the image of neighbors coming together to help her rebuild her stand. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of the story the town would tell for years to come. By the time Angela had finished cleaning up her stand and driving home, the events of that morning had already begun to ripple through the town. Phones buzzed with alerts, messages were forwarded, and social media posts started appearing with videos of the confrontation at the market. People shared clips showing Officer Rick tipping over the baskets, the crowd watching in silence, and the calm dignity with which Angela had handled the situation. The clips had gone viral locally before the afternoon sun had even reached its highest point. Angela's phone began to ring almost immediately after she parked in her driveway. At first, she ignored it, thinking it might be another telemarketer or a routine call. But when the notifications started piling up, texts, missed calls, and voice messages, she realized she needed to see what was happening. The first message came from Councilman Howard. It was brief, but warm. "Angela, people are talking about how you handled the market situation. The town is proud of you." Angela smiled softly. Howard's words were comforting, but she knew the attention would not be limited to kind remarks. She opened the social media app on her phone and saw dozens of posts from neighbors, friends, and even strangers praising her composure. One video had been shared hundreds of times already. People were commenting, "This is leadership in action. Our mayor is incredible, so calm under pressure. Finally, someone shows respect and patience instead of anger." Then, she saw a few messages from reporters asking for interviews. The morning's quiet visit to the market had turned into a story bigger than she had expected. Angela knew she had a choice. She could respond, or she could stay out of the spotlight. She decided to answer carefully, keeping her focus on the community rather than herself. By late afternoon, a local news crew had arrived at her doorstep. The camera was set up on a tripod, and the reporter greeted her with a friendly smile. "Mayor Carter, thank you for agreeing to speak with us. The town has seen your actions this morning. How are you feeling?" Angela nodded politely. "I'm feeling grateful," she said simply. "Grateful for the people in our town who help each other every day, and grateful that we can come together even in moments of misunderstanding. Today wasn't about me. It was about everyone who values fairness and respect." The reporter jotted down her words and smiled. "It's clear the community agrees. Videos of your calm response have gone viral locally, and people are calling it an example of true leadership. How do you hope this moment influences others?" Angela paused thoughtfully. "I hope it reminds people that patience and understanding go a long way. Everyone makes mistakes, and we all have moments where we could act better. What matters is how we respond and how we treat others in those moments. That's something we can all practice, whether we're in a leadership position or not." After the interview ended, Angela went inside to sit with a cup of tea. She reflected on the morning and the reactions that were now spreading throughout the town. People she had never met were praising her, and neighbors were calling to check if she was okay. Even some of the younger residents, teenagers who often had a casual or indifferent view of local politics, were sending messages of support. At the same time, she knew there would be questions directed toward Officer Rick. A few posts suggested that he had been overstepping his authority, and people were debating whether his actions had been fair. Some comments were critical, while others were more neutral, trying to understand the situation from his perspective. Angela understood that tension existed on both sides, but she also knew it was important not to fan the flames of anger. She drafted a short statement for social media. "I hope today reminds everyone that our community thrives when we respect each other. Mistakes happen, but patience, understanding, and kindness help us move forward together." By evening, the story had reached beyond the town. A regional news outlet picked up the video and interview, highlighting the market incident as an example of leadership in unexpected situations. The headlines read, "Mayor shows calm in public challenge at local market," and "Community applauds." "Mayor for grace under pressure." People in neighboring towns began to talk about the story, sharing clips and discussing how Angela's approach was different from what they had seen elsewhere. It wasn't just about one incident at a market. It was about the way someone handled themselves when the situation could have easily escalated into conflict. Angela received another call, this time from the town council office. "Angela," said the voice on the line, "the feedback has been overwhelming. People want to know if you'll be holding a community meeting to talk about the market and vendor rules. They're hoping this becomes an example for everyone." Angela considered it. She wanted to maintain fairness and transparency. "Yes," she said after a pause, "we should have a meeting, not about punishment, but about understanding, communication, and making sure our market is a place where everyone can feel welcome and respected." The next morning, the market was already buzzing with a new kind of energy. Vendors set up their stalls early, but instead of tension, there was a sense of unity. People greeted each other warmly, and many stopped by Angela's stand to thank her for her example. Some brought small gestures, flowers, homemade cookies, and even little notes of appreciation. As Angela unpacked her baskets, she noticed a small child standing nearby, looking up at her with wide eyes. "You're the mayor?" the child asked softly. "Yes," Angela said, kneeling down to the child's level. "But today I'm just a neighbor selling fruit. We all have roles, and we all help our town in different ways." The child nodded, still holding a small hand toward her basket of strawberries. Angela smiled and handed over a few, making sure to explain, "These are for you. Enjoy them and share them with your family." Parents nearby smiled, whispering to each other about how someone could show leadership not through speeches, but through simple actions. Angela's approach had become a lesson for everyone who watched, adults and children alike. Meanwhile, Officer Rick had returned to the station, feeling the weight of the previous morning's events. His supervisor had already seen the videos and called him in for a private conversation. "Rick," the chief said calmly, "I watched what happened yesterday. I understand you were following protocol, but you could have handled it differently. It's important to respect the people in our community, especially when they are known for their contributions and integrity." Rick nodded slowly. He knew the chief was right, and he thought about how Angela had never lost her calm, how she had treated him with respect even when he had been forceful. The lesson weighed heavily on him. Authority wasn't about showing power or control. It was about understanding, patience, and leadership through example. Back at the market, Angela was speaking with several vendors about new rules and guidelines to avoid future confusion. She suggested a simple idea: marking spots more clearly, having a volunteer to guide vendors when the area was crowded, and creating an open line of communication with the officers on duty. The vendors responded with enthusiasm. They appreciated that she wasn't criticizing anyone, but instead looking for solutions that benefited everyone. As the day went on, the positive energy continued. Shoppers moved freely, conversations were lively, and children ran between stalls laughing. Angela felt a sense of quiet pride. Today wasn't about her title. It was about community, understanding, and learning from mistakes without letting them become divisions. By late afternoon, Angela finally took a seat under a small awning near her stall. She watched the market, taking in the colorful fruits, the smiles, and the sense of togetherness. She realized that a single morning, a few scattered peaches, and a tense interaction could spark something much bigger. It could teach patience, humility, and the power of calm leadership. She picked up her notebook, jotting down thoughts and reminders for future market days. Notes about clearer markings, about speaking with officers ahead of time, and about creating a volunteer schedule for busy weekends. Everything she wrote reflected one idea: building a community where respect and kindness guided action. As the sun began to dip behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the market, Angela felt a gentle satisfaction. The incident with the officer had been unexpected, challenging, and, at the same time, a chance to show what leadership really meant. She knew the story would continue to travel through the town, through conversations, through social media posts, and even through the children who had watched her quietly in awe. And she also knew this was only the beginning. Lessons learned today would guide decisions tomorrow. Mistakes could be corrected, misunderstandings resolved, and trust could be strengthened, all through patience, understanding, and calm actions that spoke louder than words. Angela closed her notebook and smiled at the busy market around her. She had turned a moment of tension into a lasting lesson for the town. Today, she realized, leadership wasn't about the title alone. It was about actions, respect, and the ability to guide a community through understanding. The days after the market incident passed with a strange mix of normalcy and excitement. The town was buzzing quietly in the background, not with gossip meant to hurt anyone, but with discussions about leadership, community, and how one morning could change perceptions. Angela continued her routine, waking early to tend to her garden, prepare for the market, and check in with the town council on ongoing projects. But there was a subtle difference now. People watched her not just as a vendor, but as the mayor who had faced a challenge with calm and fairness. Angela arrived at the market on Saturday morning and was greeted by familiar faces, all smiling, and offering words of encouragement. Vendors she had only exchanged polite nods with before now waved enthusiastically. Customers who had stopped by the previous week returned, not only for the produce, but also to support her as a figure of guidance in their community. She set up her stall with care, arranging baskets of apples, peaches, and tomatoes just as she always did, but now she felt the presence of a larger purpose behind her actions. A small group of children approached, carrying handwritten notes and drawings. "We made these for you," one of them said proudly. Angela knelt down to receive them, her heart warming as she looked at the colorful papers filled with flowers, suns, and little hearts. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I'll put these on my board at the town office to remind me of all of you and the good work we can do together." The market seemed to move more smoothly now. People treated each other with care. Officers, like Rick, walked by with a sense of respect rather than authority, and the energy was cooperative rather than tense. Angela noticed that Rick had returned, but this time he approached her with a cautious nod. She smiled softly at him. "Good morning," she said. "It's good to see you here, helping the market run smoothly." Rick nodded back, his face less rigid than before. "Good morning, Mayor," he replied, and for the first time his tone held respect instead of command. They did not speak much beyond that, but their brief exchange was enough to show a change. Small steps could lead to understanding, and Angela knew that today's efforts were as much about repairing relationships as they were about running a market. Throughout the morning, reporters returned, this time not to capture a tense moment, but to focus on community and the ways people were coming together. Angela spoke calmly about fairness, leadership, and cooperation. She emphasized that mistakes should not divide people, but instead teach lessons about patience and respect. Her words resonated not only with the adults, but also with the younger viewers who were watching the videos online. She made it clear that leadership was more than holding a title. It was about setting examples and helping others grow through guidance, understanding, and empathy. As the market day progressed, the town council held a brief meeting near the center of the square. Angela addressed a crowd that included vendors, shoppers, and local officials. "This market is more than just a place to sell and buy food," she said. "It's a place where our community comes together. And as your mayor, it's my responsibility to ensure that everyone here feels safe, respected, and valued." She paused, letting the words settle among the listeners. "Yesterday was a lesson for all of us," she continued. "Mistakes happen, misunderstandings arise, and sometimes people act before they think. But what matters is how we respond. We respond with patience. We respond with understanding. We respond by respecting each other. The crowd listened quietly, nodding in agreement. Vendors shared stories of small disputes they had handled better because of her example. Parents told her how their children were learning about respect, calmness, and leadership through her actions. Even Officer Rick had joined the meeting quietly, listening without speaking, absorbing the message. By mid-afternoon, the market had transformed completely. What had once been an ordinary Saturday had turned into a living example of a community learning from a challenge. People helped each other, resolved small disagreements quickly, and showed kindness in ways that made the entire space feel warm and cooperative. Angela walked through the aisles, thanking each vendor for their participation and their willingness to be part of a larger lesson. The incident had also sparked wider conversations. Schools were discussing the videos as part of lessons on respect, citizenship, and community service. Local organizations were inviting Angela to speak about leadership and how small actions could have a significant impact. Even neighboring towns were reaching out, curious about the approach she had taken and the positive energy it had generated. Angela never sought attention for herself. She kept her focus on the community and the ongoing work to make the town a better place. But she couldn't help feeling quietly proud of what had been accomplished. A moment that could have been embarrassing, tense, or divisive had instead become a teaching moment for the town, an example of calm leadership, and a demonstration of respect that rippled outward in ways she hadn't imagined. As the day drew to a close, Angela packed up her stall, careful to leave it tidy for the next market day. She waved to neighbors, exchanged a few final smiles, and thanked everyone for their cooperation. Standing at the edge of the market, she took a deep breath, looking out over the square, now quiet, with only the last few shoppers lingering. She felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond her role as mayor or vendor. She had seen firsthand that leadership wasn't just about decisions or policies. It was about actions, patience, and respect. On her way home, she reflected on the lessons learned not just by herself but by the entire town. People had witnessed how quickly misunderstandings could escalate and how easily they could be resolved with calm, steady guidance. They had seen that respect could transform tense situations into opportunities for growth, understanding, and connection. And most importantly, they had seen that leadership was not a title alone. It was the responsibility to act thoughtfully, fairly, and kindly in all circumstances. At home, Angela wrote a short note in her journal. Today showed me that patience and understanding are more powerful than authority alone. A single moment of composure can teach lessons that last a lifetime. Our community thrives when we support one another, learn from mistakes, and work together with respect. She closed the journal and placed it on the table, feeling a sense of quiet peace. Later that evening, the town council sent a message to the community, thanking everyone for their participation in making the market a success. They highlighted Angela's calm approach and emphasized the importance of learning from challenges rather than allowing them to create divisions. Families, vendors, and officers alike received the message warmly, reinforcing the lesson of cooperation and respect that had begun on that remarkable morning. As Angela prepared for bed, she reflected on the week's events. The incident with Officer Rick, the attention from the media, the conversations with neighbors, and the school discussions had all shown her something important. Change could start with a single act of understanding and grow into a movement of respect that touched everyone. She smiled softly, thinking of the faces of the children at the market, the vendors helping one another, and the quiet nod from Officer Rick. It had all begun with a simple morning at a produce stand. But the lesson it carried had reached far beyond the baskets of fruit. It was a lesson about leadership, about calmness in the face of tension, and about the power of respect and understanding in shaping a community. Angela turned off the lights and sat quietly for a moment, imagining the town waking to another market day. She felt ready not just for the challenges of leadership, but for the everyday moments that could teach lessons, build connections, and strengthen the bonds of a community. She knew there would be more difficulties ahead, but she also knew that with patience, kindness, and respect, the town and its people would continue to thrive. That night, the market, the town, and the people within it rested a little wiser, a little kinder, and a little more aware of the power of calm, thoughtful leadership. And Angela, the mayor who had stood calmly behind her produce stand that morning, drifted to sleep with the quiet knowledge that she had helped guide her community toward a brighter, more understanding future. The story of that morning would be remembered for years, not as a tale of conflict, but as a story of leadership, patience, and respect. And the town, shaped by her example, would continue to grow together, learning that sometimes the simplest actions, like standing calm in the middle of a market, could inspire the deepest lessons for everyone.